Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is make a Git repository to hold my code, and that way I'll be able to share it with you as well. And so I'm going to go over to GitHub, and I'm not going to require you to make your own repository, but if you want to do that and get some practice using Git, it will definitely help you when you get to CIS 234A. So I'm going to go ahead and sign into my account. And then multi-factor authentication. So hang on a sec. Getting a one-time password. Okay. All right. So I'm on GitHub. And then I'm going to go ahead and create this repository in the PCC CIS 233Y organization. So let me go to that organization first. Actually, hang on. Yeah, 233Y. And then I'm going to go ahead and view organization. And then I'm going to go to repositories. And I'm going to make a new repository. And then for this one, since it's going to be a music video manager, I'm going to call it music videos. And then I'm using the Python naming convention, lower snake case. And then this is going to be list manager for YouTube music videos organized by different categories. Okay, and then you have a choice between public and private. I'm going to make mine public because I want to be able to share it with you all. But I generally recommend private because we're not going to talk about cybersecurity until relatively late in the course, the last 2 weeks. And until then, your credentials for accessing the database and some other stuff is going to be public. It's going to be in the source code, which means that anybody who can see your source code can get access to those credentials. And so I recommend you make yours private, but I'm going to make mine public. And then I don't need any of this. I guess I'll go ahead and add a README. That's just a readme.md file markdown. And then for gitignore, I'll make my own. And then for the license, I like Creative Commons. So let me see what we have here. I have Creative Commons 2.0. No, Creative Commons 0. Well, they don't have exactly the license I was looking for, which was 4.0. But let's do Creative Commons 0 version 1 universal. And then create repository. And then it's handy on GitHub when you create a repository. If you create an empty initial repository, it gives you some instructions on how to create a project and then associate it with the repository you just created. But since I have some starter files, what I want to do is start by cloning this repository and making my project inside of the repository folder. So in order to do that, I want to put it somewhere. And by default, all of your Python projects are going to go in your users, C users, your username, and then there's a PyCharm projects folder under here if you're using PyCharm, which I am. And then here are your project folders. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clone the music videos repository into this folder. And I can basically, if I scroll to the bottom here and like just sort of right click somewhere and say open git bash here, that opens a git bash window right in that folder. And so what I want to do is git clone https github.com pcc cis 233y, and then music videos.git. And that's the command that you're going to use to clone a copy of my repository as well. Okay, so now I have a project folder inside of PyCharm projects. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start PyCharm, not PyCharm. And I have a previous file open from last time I taught 233Y. I was doing a bookmark manager. The items were bookmarks, and then we had collections of different bookmarks. But this one I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open. And then I'm going to navigate to my PyCharm projects folder. And then inside of here, I have my music_videos. And then click on that to select it and say OK. And I'm going to keep this open for a minute because I want to grab something out of it. So I'm going to do new window. So here's my initial empty project. And by default, I automatically got Python 3.12 configured as the project interpreter, which is fine for this. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. If I did want to change the project interpreter, the way you do that is you go to the pancake menu, go to settings, and then under project:music videos, or your project, whatever your project name is, you go to Python interpreter, and then you can change which interpreter you want to use. And then if it's not in that list there, you can add a local interpreter and then navigate to the one that you want. So typically they're going to be in users, your username, app data, programs, actually app data local, programs, Python, and then inside of your Python folder, app data local, programs. So I don't actually have any installed. This is the normal place, but usually you'd have Python there. But I'm actually using a Windows Server. And so mine are actually in users, actually program files. Python. Yeah, Python 3.12. So this is where mine is, but yours is going to be in user, your username, app data, local programs, Python, and then Python 3.12. And what you want to do is you want to find the exe, so python.exe, and that's what you're going to select and use for your project interpreter. Now, if you are doing this environment setting here is really important. So what I recommend you do, this is useful if you want to have different environments configured for different projects. And sometimes you need that because you're using third-party libraries that have version restrictions on them. Things are not compatible with each other all the time. So you need to curate which versions of libraries you're using, but that will hopefully not be an issue. So I just like to use my system interpreter instead, because that way I don't get a couple of megabytes of copies of stuff that have to go along all the time. So I like to pick system interpreter, and then it's going to be exactly the same thing that I just selected, this python.exe and Python 3.12, and then say OK. All right, and it should pick up if you have any libraries installed already. You'll see them here. If you want to go ahead and add them, you can click the plus sign and configure packages. We'll be adding a few along the way, but we don't need anything to get started. So I'm going to say OK. So that's how the project interpreter gets set up, and you'll need to do that when you clone my repository, most likely as well. So that's the first thing, and then the next thing that I want is I want to have my input validation file, which you have from Lab 1. So here's one that I have. I'm going to copy that out of a previous project. And then under my music videos root project folder, I'm going to use something called the N-tier architecture for this program, which is similar to what we did in 133Y with the names, database, and the IMDb browser, that kind of thing. And I'm going to keep doing that here. And as before, so you have basically three layers. There's a UI layer or presentation layer where your user interface is, and then a logic layer where you define your data classes and that kind of thing, and then a data layer where you have all your code that talks to the database. And so right now, I'm going to need a directory for my UI. And I'm going to put these in separate folders this term. You don't need to. You can put everything on the top level just like you did in 133Y. But I actually find it's more nicely organized if I do it this way. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So there's a UI layer, a logic layer, and then we'll go ahead and put a data layer. And then when you're using Git, if you have an empty project folder, it doesn't get put in the repository. So it's a good idea to always put something in there. And by convention, if you want to have a file in here so that it gets pushed to the repository, but you don't really care what's in there, you can go ahead and make a new file called .gitkeep. So, and then you can just leave that empty. So .gitkeep means keep this folder basically. And then I'll add one to logic as well. I'm going to go ahead and I'm not going to add files from here. Sorry, my trackball's messing up a little. Okay, so I'm not going to add files to my Git repository from inside of PyCharm. I'm going to do that from Git bash. So I'm going to say don't ask again, and I'm going to hit cancel. Okay. So for the UI folder, instead of making a git keep, I'm going to go ahead and go back here, copy my input validation again, and then go back and paste into the UI folder. All right, and then this should look familiar to you from Lab 1. I have an input int that takes GE, GT, LE, and LT. I have prompt, I have error, and then a Y or N function. I have input string, which takes a validation function, select item from a list of items, and then an input item wrapper. So it should be the same kind of thing you have already. And then I also need my gitignore file. And so I'm going to copy the gitignore file out of my bookmark manager. But we're going to look at it, so don't worry. And then I'm going to paste that right in this top level music videos folder. So here's the gitignore that I have. Basically, I'm going to ignore the entire .idea folder. So that's a folder where PyCharm keeps all of its local settings for the project. And so I'm going to ignore anything like, they're mostly XML files, but like every time you open a window or move the position or change anything in the menus, it's going to write to an XML file in this folder, and we really don't need all that stuff. And then this PyCache, that's where Python puts compiled versions of your Python code for optimization. So basically, Python has a just-in-time compiler. When you're running the Python code, it compiles the source code, the Python, into something called P code, which is not quite machine language, but pretty close. And it stores those in separate files inside of this PyCache folder so that it's faster the next time you hit that file. And then these two files, I'm not going to care about at all until like week 8, 9, 10, week 9 or 10. But they're here and they're not going to hurt me, so I'm going to leave them there. Okay, so now I have a gitignore. I have the project structure. What I'm going to do is to cd into my music videos folder. And by default, I'm on the main branch, and then git status. So here we see the new files. There's a git ignore. There's these 3 folders. And then I'm going to go ahead and do git add dot git commit -m initial commit with project structure and git ignore. And then I'm going to push that back to the remote repository. And so there's my main branch.